Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku was trained by Saitama. An alternate universe where Izuku isn't trained by the one with one for all, but an old bald man who only needed one punch for all the enemies he had ever encountered. Know this, the strongest hero isn't necessarily the strongest man. The farther you get from the people you want to save, the harder it is to save their spirits. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Todoroki's world was falling apart. He had always despised his father, but now the world agrees with his sentiments. But that was far from a good thing. Your left side is unsightly. He feels nothing from the whispers of strangers on the train. He had heard those words before, and right now he was meeting that person who said those words first, a patient of a mental hospital. The public outcry about his father, the rampant gossiping of things that were left behind closed doors. Such a thing was a blessing and a curse. Both victim and perpetrator are defiled by the eyes of the public. For a family headed by the number 2 hero, privacy is a privilege. It is a wonder how his family matters have been kept private for so long that even a fanatic of heroes such as Midoriya was in the dark about his situation. As his thoughts drift to his classmate, as he remembers that face, he forces down his fear. Ever since he started attending UA, he had been forced to face the uglier sides of himself. Despite the power he possessed, he was both powerless and a coward. How selfish he must be, for the only reason of his visit now after all these years were not for his mother's sake, but to simply absolve some of the swirling feelings inside of him. He talks to the front desk receptionist and locates the room his mother is kept in. As he walks through the hallways of the mental hospital, as he glances at the patients, he can't help but notice something is wrong. As he opens that door, his mother is in view. As he works up the courage to look his own mother in the eyes, the figure of his mother melts away in viscous goo, and it is then he realizes something is wrong. As he bolts out the hospital room, he hears a shout. Gah, 2 mental patients with the same face are facing each other. If only I wasn't so squeamish about drinking blood. One of those patients melts away to reveal the naked form of someone Todoroki vaguely knew, Monoma from B class. At the instant he saw that face, the entire hallway they were in was covered in a thin layer of ice, freezing everything in place. But just like that form of his mother, the form of Monoma melts away. The nightmare continues. This was the first field assignment of the Ditto trio, so of course there would be monitors keeping track of the team's performance from a getaway car. Mr. Compress was waiting in the car, and it was not by chance he was the one driving it. Mr. Compress had worked in the entertainment industry before he had settled in this sort of life, though it could be interpreted that he never left. He had dismissed the students at UA as people who had beliefs hammered into them by others with no ambitions of their own, which was why he was intrigued with one of them insisting to join the League of Villains. Mr. Compress, Jirojairi and Monoma all shared a common love for snazzy clothes. Though they all loved top hats, gloves, vests, tuxedos, canes and fine watches, they couldn't really imagine wearing the same thing. Choice is important. Choice is what separates man from beasts and machines. Decked out in a smiling mask, top hat, fine overcoat and a cane, he had once tried to grab the essence of what made a phantom thief. With his quirk, he could temporarily compress anything into a marble without damaging it, which is to say, he might have been born for thieving. Monoma by contrast was decked out in a tuxedo decorated with various fine watches. Unlike Okurojairi, he chose not hide his face. In the end, isn't that what a phantom thief should aspire to do? A bold, suave gentleman who stole things in full view while being cheered on by an audience? He had lent his quirk to Monoma just as Toga and Twice had. For these 5 minutes in which his copy ability lasts, he was the perfect phantom thief. A master of theft, disguise and decoys. Right now, was simply parked in front of the mental hospital anticipating an easy heist without any complications. That place is sure nostalgic. All the vintage shonen Jump anyone could read. Mr. Compress had to suppress his displeasure of having to bring that weird waitress who works at Kurojairi's bar with them, who was currently monopolizing the shotgun seat as an insurance policy. From that offhand comment, yes, he could totally imagine that waitress belonging to a mental hospital. The perfect phantom thief had left a public message for Endeavor, hoping to make the spiriting away of a spectacle. Instead, Endeavor ignored it. To avoid another incident like in Hosu, he used his influence to suppress the media. It seemed that he didn't care too much about his wife, who had already bore him what he had wanted, and right now the successor Endeavor had wanted was chasing down the Ditto trio in hot pursuit. As the trio exited the hospital, Todoroki had jumped down several floors, breaking his fall with the ice he could generate, and continued to surf on top of it. A chance meeting they did not account for, thus nothing went according to plan despite the operation being a success. So this is a son's love, huh? Well, I'm certainly not the type to be chased, so that has to be it. Toga had always been a chaser, so this was a different experience. Huh, what are you saying? No one chasing you? I would. Enough talking, get in. Twice could not finish his sentence as he and Toga were dragged into the getaway car by Monoma as Mr. Compress floored the gas pedal. No one bothered to close the car door, to the annoyance of all the other motorists. But good thing they had insurance from All Fiction. The 5 minutes of Monoma's quirk were up, and the compressed form of returned to its original state. Their target was literally on their laps. Despite how one would normally react after being kidnapped, Mrs. Todoroki, true to being a literal ice woman, stayed cool. She looked upon the incident with total apathy. Like a piece of furniture, she has gotten used to being moved around by others. Despite being in a car, Endeavor's masterpiece was gaining on them. But it was then when the car reached 88 miles per hour, Kurogiri, who was waiting at a nearby cafe, appeared on the road at the designated spot and opened up his warp gate. The car disappears in a puff of black smoke, leaving behind skid marks along the road. Despite usually being cool-headed, Todoroki couldn't help but curse. A tired white-haired woman watches a recording of the sports festival with her captors in a dimly lit room. Though the extraction of Endeavor's wife was successful, it was illegal, and aspiring heroes like Monoma, who helped with the operation, had to be misled. Toga, who was a serial killer, ironically was more trustworthy around the hostage, and with her quirk, she was indispensable in deceiving Monoma by posing as the woman's mother. As far as Monoma knew, he had done a good deed by freeing a woman from her abusive husband. What would happen to Monoma after word gets out that Endeavor's wife was kidnapped was still up in the air. The ice woman presents no resistance, and simply watches the projected recording, the only other source of sound in the room being a pen rubbing against a notebook and incessant muttering coming from that petite curly green-haired waitress. Of course, eccrine sweat glands are most numerous on the feet, face, palms and armpits, so it's only natural that Kaken can. Toga crashes onto the sofa and breaks the silence out of her boredom. The pen stops. So this is what you do in your free time, huh? You must really love that wimp. Wimp? He's one of the coolest people I've ever known. Of course you want to be like the one you love. It's natural. You take notes, trying to be like him. But for you, I guess it was out of your reach. I don't really understand your taste. But I love tattered guys reeking in blood, so I can't really judge you. I don't really understand it either. Kaken might just have been a big fish in my small pond. His personality was garbage, so I thought it was just the sparks he could make with his hands at first that won me over. A smile blooms on the freckled face. For someone like Midoriya, everyone shines so brightly that they can't help but be blinded by it. Those without light naturally reach out for it. That's why I cut off his hands, but he didn't stop being amazing. My feelings did not change, so that meant they weren't shallow. Well, from what I can see, he has hands. You're lucky. I can only carve up the ones I love once. With a hand on the chest, feeling for that familiar heartbeat, trying to make the story that was just said a heartfelt one. Yet, because they didn't change, I wanted to take everything back, and somehow it was like I never existed. To be or not to be, that was the question, and the child had chosen not to be. Being projected was a green-haired boy with bald spots standing on the podium for second place. That freckled face is mirrored for an instant between reality and the projection, before a fist plants itself into the projected image. As opposed to a TV screen, there was no dramatic cracking of glass, and the action could only come off as lame, especially as the one who threw that punch fell over onto the floor ungracefully. It was there. Mrs. Todoroki felt something. Your left side is unsightly. Those were words as she poured boiling water onto her son's face. She too had wanted to disappear that day. Failures, that was the word her husband used to refer to their children that did not inherit the fire and ice quirks in the correct ratio like he had wanted. The fact she bore a child like Shoto, who inherited both their quirks perfectly after only 4 attempts, was no small miracle. Endeavor may have been the number 2 hero of this era, But there were others who held that rank before, including one with green curly hair. The tornado of terror. Yet that boy, born instead of me, born because of me, with the same circumstances, seeing him, I can't help but think frustration wells up within the smile. I lived my life all wrong, was when the laughing transitioned into sobs, tears literally streaming down the freckled face before being comforted by a pair of hands. Life is a mundane miracle, but as people experience life's displeasures, it is only natural to take that life for granted. A zygote is formed by the union of a single sperm cell and a single egg cell. But while there is one egg cell, there are anywhere between 40 million to 1.2 billion sperm cells. The probability of any one individual being born is essentially close to 0%, which is enough for anyone to herald one's birth as a miracle. But by that same token, it is a curse. There was always a near 100% chance that someone else would have been born instead, someone more deserving of that gift of life. Whether it was Stockholm Syndrome, sympathy, or mere sophistry to soften her guilt as a failed mother, Mrs. Todoroki wrapped her arms around the sobbing figure and said the words that had been said before. "I'm sorry." Such were familiar words with no meaning to the inferior fish people called Zako. It's not your fault. In the case where a human turns into a monster, due to a complex or an obsession on a bad habit, an explosion of frustration caused by a wish to transform or dissatisfied desire causes a sudden transformation starting from an abnormal cell reaction. There have also been many cases of living beings other than humans turning into monsters triggered by things such as pollution. This is a living being reborn as another being, not a limiter being broken. Excerpt from On the Origin of Quirks by Dr. Genus. Ida knew something was up with Todoroki, for he was once the same way not too long ago. There was something clearly wrong if he was storming into the dining area of Class 1B in a way one would only think Bakugo would be capable of. For that reason Ida tailed him. "Monoma." The tone used was clearly a threat. "Does everyone in A class lack tact? You better not drag the rest of the school down with you." Just as Todoroki was about to put his hands on Monoma's neck, oversized hands stopped his arms. "I know his behavior is less than friendly at times, but I can't condone what you're trying to do right now." Though the orange-haired kendo was part of the minority of B class who had no ill will towards those of A, there still existed a line that A class should not cross. It was at that moment Ida crossed the line that separated the lunchroom line that separated the classes. "I apologize on behalf of Todoroki, there is no excuse, but I know he has his own reasoning for doing this," were his words while lowering his head. Such was the natural course of action for a class president. Monoma did not stop his attack. "Everyone has their reasons. Doesn't mean they're good. Just think of Endeavor. Right now, I'm just like him. Is that what you wanted me to say?" The threatening tone did not disappear even with Ida's intervention. "You really do have your father's eyes, don't you?" The vine-haired girl in the back of the crowd was contemplating whether to restrain the interloper. She was a grass type, meaning she was double weak against an ice and fire type, but she never needed to as Todoroki calmed down. Public image was important to Monoma, and with that line of reasoning, Todoroki forces down his swirling emotions and achieves a sort of balance, carefully forming his next words. "You're not someone who gets into trouble like us, as you say. You're also someone who doesn't do things for no reason. What you did that day, that group you were together with, I want in. So you're eating alone again?" That was the question Saitama had asked his disciple in the cafeteria. It was a common occurrence. The strong are solitary, is what many like to claim, but that is not the truth. Just like in the jungle, it is natural for living things to avoid the strong to continue on living. In the distance at another table, Uraraka was bothering Bakugo once again. "So, Deku eats katsudon every opportunity he gets. Do you have anything to do with that Katsuki? Your brain is clearly rotten. Let me replace it for you." With fireworks crackling in his hands, Bakugo was lit, but fortunately Kirishima was there to serve as a wall to block the inevitable explosion. Boom! As Saitama eyed to fried pork and rice combo on his disciple's tray, he couldn't help but associate it with the police. But he had long forgotten why. Wonder if the police station serves the same food. Regardless of how wise Saitama-sensei may appear to Izuku, some of the things he says could only be taken as random, not unlike that frog girl. "Saitama-sensei, is there something I can do to make up what I'm lacking?" "Well, you're still young. People don't finish developing mentally and physically until age 25. At least that's what car insurance companies say. Don't sweat it. You'll have other problems once you get there." Such were words with no meaning to the one who can't achieve anything people call Deku. As Izuku currently stands, he had infinite strength, but that alone did not guarantee victory. When facing his peers, his power was simply too much, yet when faced with life or death situations, Izuku was still lacking. Even if he himself is invincible, he can never call himself a hero if he can't save all the lives in front of him, regardless of how hard he wanted to be one. To be or not to be, that was the question, and the child had chosen to be. The strength he had now had isolated him from his peers, yet he still sought out more, for he was born weak. Such was a madness born from weakness. For someone like Midoriya, everyone shines so brightly that they can't help but be blinded by it. Those without light naturally reach out for it. But he was different. A common birth, a common life, no qualities whatsoever, a simple ordinary person. With effort alone, he pried open the door of his limits and broke his limiter. Seeing the common sense defying strength of someone that had removed their limiter and evolved by themselves, just remembering makes me laugh at how comical my own ambitions were. Excerpt from On the Origin of Quirks by Dr. Genius. Kakin was strong. Kakin was popular. Kakin had the majority by his side. Kakin was an asshole. Of those things, only one remained true as Bakugo entered UA. There was only so much he could learn from challenging someone like Saitama, who was in an entirely different realm in strength. Fighting Saitama was no different than smashing one's head into a brick wall repeatedly. It didn't matter if Bakugo could muster up more speed, strength, or technique. The difference between them did not shrink in the slightest, and thus room for learning was limited. One has to learn how to walk before they run. That screw that pierced him that day, the screw that ended his life, yet did not, was an illusion, yet not. He had honed his skills in facing against opponents with undeniable presence, but his experience against the immaterial was lacking. Nothing much happened after the Hosu incident in his internship with Endeavor, and he was desperately seeking to find more fulfilling sources of experience. Attacks with infinite speed were one thing, but at least they still followed the rules set by the world, with Saitama being the exception. Bakugo was crass and socially inept, someone who actively sought to smash himself against walls until they broke, but he still had a sense to lower his short-term goals and focus on the long term. He couldn't spend all his time grinding against Saitama. There was a limited amount of experience that could be gained from fighting someone that dwarfs you completely, so he searched for more manageable walls to grind against. His explosive flying kick creates a beautiful arc as it simply phases through the image of that man straight out of some Belgian comic book. Mirio, despite still being a high schooler, was the one everyone lauded as being the closest to being the number one hero even among the pros, an undeniable, yet immaterial existence. Popping in and out of existence, launching attacks that should not be possible, was not outside the realm of plausibility once quirks came into play, even if quirks were supposed to be physical abilities. Even though Bakugo had faced opponents which were untouchable, Mirio, though literally untouchable, was more reachable than Saitama-sensei. That plain face with a perpetually jolly demeanor, Saitama had it too. You first years are really energetic these days. Getting into fights with upperclassmen was nothing new for Bakugo. Whether he started them or not, it was a constant in elementary school. Winning against the odds, making impossible possible, beating the unbeatable, touching the untouchable, seeing the invisible, those were the reasons that the kids his age followed him, Deku being no exception. Just who the hell do you think I am? Bakugo continued to fight the power. With a reluctant phantom thief in front, Shoto eyes the not-so-secret hideout of the League of Villains. It was hard to miss considering that most of the surrounding buildings were covered in a thick layer of ice, yet this ice wasn't his doing. Tenya Ito was keen on tailing the two a few days ago, and would still be tailing the two if not for a certain phone call from his brother Tensei, who had been crippled by stain. Kurogiri's bar was covered in ice, with the members of League of Villains all stuck to various surfaces, with the man with patchwork skin being the exception. With embers in his hand, the stained sympathizer Dabi grabbed onto the immobile Tamira's neck. I was uneasy, but now I'm certain. This organization doesn't have a just cause, does it? Ideologies are like art. People always have their own interpretations. Despite the searing burn on his neck, Tamira did not show any signs of discomfort. After feeling for his fingers, the ice that supported him turned to dust, and he fell ungracefully on the floor. He stood back up groggily and treated the whole incident like a chore, even as Dabi ignited his flames and threatened to burn the entire building to ash. You're not giving me a convincing reason to let you all live. We all just want to destroy the present. That's what Stain and I agreed on. Dabi could sense that Tamira was telling the truth, but he could not tell if he was being implicitly dishonest. We may have different views on the ultimate outcome, but that doesn't matter. I hate the stupid smiling masses, but I can't deny the strength of a group. But do we really need to keep that thing around? Dobby turned his gaze to the green-haired waitress who was inexplicably free-form. The ice was currently hacking away at the ice, holding the others in place with a strange-looking axe with a heated blade. Heat Hawk. If her misery stemmed from her memories, then what I needed to do was obvious. On that freckled face was a genuine smile with no deceit. What was done was obvious. Dobby could not deny that. The tone of her voice was absent of any form of regret. Dobby continued to stare, and the freckled face turned to meet his gaze. Hey, at least I'm not a murderer. Someone has to stain themselves with. Dobby could not finish that quote after some thought. Twice could not help but to interject into the conversation after picking up on the double standards. Still down 1 am I left though, did a number on us. Well, nothing went according to plan, all according to the plan. Is that my arm? It was fortunate for Twice that his arm was completely numb from the cold, that he could not even feel the heated axe cut through it. Kurogyri had to end this farce. For someone whose body of mist, the ice did little to hold him down. Tamura was losing his patience with the situation. Scratching his head, he gave an order. Just hit the undo button. Indeed, just like Twice had suggested, everything was within the margins of predictability. A bell rings as the door is opened, with Shoto entering the scene, and he isn't sure what to think, with Monoma thinking the same. From the surrounding ice and the chatter of the members of League of Villains, it was obvious that Mrs. Todoroki had escaped under her own power. It was then Monoma realized he had made a huge mistake, and Shoto wasn't very pleased. In the dimly lit bar, illuminated by a small television screen, a live urgent broadcast steals the gazes of everyone present, and they are treated to a scene of a castle of ice and snow, towering above the city. On the peak stands a single figure with white hair. All men are not created equal. Some are born prettier than others. Some are born stronger than others. Some are born into poverty and are brought up sick and feeble. In terms of ability, humans are all inherently different from one another, were the words of a white-haired woman with a black-stained tongue. The civilians who were simply enjoying a day of shopping met a most unfortunate fate, that fate being death, either from hypothermia or asphyxiation. Winter brings about the end of life, the season where the trees lack leaves and the vegetation is covered in snow, where the animals enter a deep sleep. Though in this case right now that sleep is eternal. Torrents of ice and snow covered the shopping center with no regard for life. Could someone have stopped the mad woman with the ice quirk? Perhaps. Quirks were weapons that 80% of the population possessed, but the people did not use them. They all put faith in the Age of Peace, hoping for a hero to do something. So many of them continued to run away even if it meant trampling on others. The strong live and the weak die. The ice that was produced was of a quality and quantity that few could imagine, especially considering the person that produced it. The ice Shoto had used during the sports festival could not compare. The ice did not merely bind victims. There was murderous intent behind it. Many were frozen, some stopped breathing, and some had already frozen to death. The people were waiting for the hero. Even the heroes were waiting for a hero with a suitable quirk. To beat an ice type, according to a handheld game that children would play, you needed a fighting type, a steel type, a rock type, or a fire type. Endeavor, whose fiery statue, which was flickering away with doubt, was in a situation he had never expected. He never expected to face down his wife like this. Shoto could only ask a single question regarding his mother: what did you do to her? The green-eyed monster pondered that question in the same way Deku would, with that familiar mumbling about, with a right hand on the chin and the left hand resting on the right elbow. Yeah, maybe I messed up. We were watching Akame J killed together, and I really wanted to know if an ice quirk could actually freeze time if it was strong enough. The green-haired monster was brimming with unsettling energy and anticipation, with both fists clenched at the side. There was no hesitation, no regret, or uncertainty in that answer. It was merely satisfaction of curiosity. Ya no, like his death. She would have gotten along with your father just fine. That's not how time works, was Kurogyri's outcry on the verge of an aneurysm. We just didn't have enough trigger is all. Fortunately, Twice, whose injuries were recently undone, was present to give an explanation on trigger. Twice here with trigger. It's the easiest way to give your quirk an extra punch, whether or not your quirk has anything to do with punching in no time. Trigger is not a placebo. It's an honest-to-goodness quirk-enhancing substance. Simply inject via syringe into bloodstream. Old-fashioned training takes time and effort, But with Trigger, just jam it in the arm and you're done, saving you time. Warning: Trigger is a highly addictive, mind-deteriorating, tongue-staining drug. If only we still had some left to demo. Can time be frozen? Experiment take 2 is a no-go. Wait. I don't understand what's going on, was Monoma's reaction to the new influx of knowledge. He was trying to deny he had anything to do with what had transpired. Twice wraps his arms around the trembling Monoma, trying to reassure him by whispering soothing words into his ear. Don't worry, we're all in this together, were words with the intent of clearing Monoma's mind, yet they only acted as shackles. Monoma had been ensnared by League of Villains. There was no going back. If League of Villains' criminal activities were to come into light, he would have no future as a hero. He could only stand there as the situation escalated. Fwum. Todoroki, who was normally calm, lost his patience. He no longer had any reservations using his flames any longer, especially against that green-haired monster, yet despite the heat that could melt metal, they had no discernible effect. The image of a carbonized corpse was a mere illusion. Twice now. Yes, Twice was trying his best not to be ignored. You've killed me 2 times so far, some hero you are. Someone like you talking about life. Life is precious. Like an explosion. A flashy, amazing, fleeting, rare thing that gives this boring, full of nothing universe meaning, just like quirks. It was true that his father was an asshole. It was true he hurt his mother. It was true Endeavor was someone who only thought of his own image, yet in the end, his father was still nothing but a man who adhered to the rules of society. Thus here were lines he would dare not cross, but Shoto in some ways has already crossed it. There was a limit to the things Endeavor would do. There were no limits to this green-haired thing in front of him would do. Well, it's not like your mom remembers you anymore. You're so lucky you get to redo relationships. If I could experience first love again, was what Toga said in a not-so-successful attempt to cheer up Todoroki, who was restraining himself from killing everyone present. Empty minds cling to whatever image they can identify with. If Endeavor and his wife had a terrible relationship that stemmed from a difference in ideals, then they would get along if they possessed the same ideals, right? Endeavor was desperately trying to thaw out the victims who were on the verge of death. As a proper hero, the safety of civilians comes first. It is only in the absence of innocence can a hero truly go all out, but his attempts were futile. Once the white-haired woman noticed him, she went for the offensive. Flames, blizzard of hell. The clash of fire and ice caused a tremendous temperature gradient across the ground, cracking it. The steam that permeated the entire shopping area only served to cover up the carnage that transpired. To think that his son and that Bakugo kid had other more urgent plans than interning at his hero agency. But it was understandable. The events regarding Stain had shaken them up recently, and he had offered them a break if they were willing to take it. Hell had frozen over, and the area had not a single living soul but the combatants. Quirks are the greatest symbol of inequality. Discrimination, class struggle, competition, war, these things are not wrong. These are catalysts for progress, for evolution. It's this piece that's wrong. The words were a direct attack on All Might and the world that he had built. The white-haired woman was normally a charmer, but the smiling face and that black tongue she was sporting were the farthest things from charming. Peace brought forth by a popularity contest. Peace, it's nothing more than waiting for inevitable death. For you who has come before me, be glad your wait is over. No matter how much Endeavor obsessed over surpassing All Might, no matter how much All Might's existence caused him to despair, Endeavor could not agree with his wife's words. Her ice was a lot colder than what he could have possibly imagined. It was clear to him that she was doped up on some sort of drug. This situation was unfathomable to Endeavor. Who did this to you? Endeavor with his burning feet created footholds on the ice tower his wife had created, and he climbed up to reach her. Was he reaching to save her or kill her? That was the question on the minds of the film crew and everyone watching the spectacle on live view. For a moment, Endeavor was above his wife, extending his arms in a deathly embrace. What comes up must come down. The queen was knocked off her tower, and Endeavor was trying his best to restrain her, as they were sent free falling. From how they were falling and based on Endeavor's size, it was obvious he would hit the ground first. The world around them was spinning upside down, ending with a mighty crash without a sound. The two who were free falling never touched the ground. Fluttering green strands of hair drift through the air like snow. Deku did not hesitate for his chance to alter fate. As Endeavor was carrying his wife in a bridal carry, Deku was doing the same with Endeavor. You better have finished evacuating everyone before you got here. Yes, was Deku's answer, but the short moment of relief was short-lived. Crunch. A spike of ice plunges itself through Endeavor's stomach and was stopped by the immovable object that was Deku. Endeavor endured the pain, and there was no inflection in his voice. "I'll nullify her ice. You find some way to knock her out," were Endeavor's words as blood pooled in his mouth. For every subsequent appearance of ice, fire would appear to melt it away, but never too much, a perfect equilibrium. Such was a testament to his mastery over the flames of hell. Deku placed him upon the floor, trying to figure out a way to deal with Mrs. Todoroki without hurting her. As Endeavor tried to get up onto his own 2 feet, he found himself unable to. A damaged spine was a totally valid possibility. His arms lost hold of the one he was trying to restrain. A chilling cold was overtaking him, and he was forced to crank up his heat to compensate. He was on the line of life and death. Every second Mrs. Todoroki was awake, Endeavor's chance to survive was shrinking. Deku had already resolved himself for what he might have to do ever since that day at Hosu. He would no longer hesitate, especially witnessing all the scattered corpses he had to run past to get here. Endeavor's grip was slipping. It was no time to be hesitating, so Deku simply slapped the white-haired woman away. Slap. She was sent careening into a wall, her frost-bitten fingers coming apart into pieces. The woman had gone beyond her limits. Though Trigger increased the quirk's power, it did not make its limitations go away. Thud. She was sprawled across the floor like a broken doll with its strings cut. Deku was standing over her wide-eyed, unsure what action he should have taken next, but it was in that moment, a voice rings out. "What do you think you're doing, Midoriya?" Shoto enters the scene through a haze of black mist, and all he could see was a green-haired monster standing over a broken toy that was once his mother. Shoto rockets toward Deku, slamming him into the wall and covering his entire body up to his neck with ice. I were the only words that came out of Deku's mouth. Shoto frantically checked the condition of his mother. Despite her condition, she was still breathing. Her core temperature was normal. She would live. Endeavor could guarantee that much. Shoto was trying to be calm in such a situation, but still a question slipped out. "Why is someone like you even a hero?" There was no hesitation in Deku's answer. "I really wanted to know if I could," was the curt answer expected of any disciple of Saitama. There was no hesitation, no regret, or uncertainty in that answer. Todoroki, who was normally calm, lost his patience. He no longer had any reservations using his flames any longer, yet despite the heat they possessed, they had no discernible effect. The fire only melted the ice that restrained him, even if that fire was launched with nothing but killing intent. "Todoroki?" Todoroki turned away. He could no longer tolerate that freckled face, being overcome with a burning hatred that transcended rationality over green monsters that did whatever they wanted. Live till afternoon. Today's topic: what's the allure of League of Villains? The popularity of League of Villains was inversely proportional to the approval ratings of heroes, and with the recent case regarding Endeavor, Tamura found himself as a guest at a talk show. Whether it was an interrogation in disguise set up by the heroes did not matter. On the stage, surrounded by the audience, Tamura wore no mask and let his face be seen with scars and all. He even wore a snazzy suit courtesy of Kurojiiri and fixed up his hair. And so, we have Tamura Shigaraki today, everyone's favorite henman, and the enigmatic leader of League of Villains. We're really grateful to have you today. Please have a seat. Now Shigaraki, it seems that your organization League of Villains is gaining a public following, especially with recent events regarding Endeavor coming into light. As your theater troupe works a lot of publicity stunts for heroes, you seem to know a lot more than us about the more private lives of heroes. Though there was no evidence for the police to gather, it seemed like you tried to imply that Endeavor was a child murderer, specifically after he dealt with the hero killer. With regards to the recent incident involving his wife just a few hours ago, what more can you tell us? The tragedy caused by Endeavor's wife could not be overlooked by the masses, and the masses could not help but blame Endeavor. The masses had no sympathy, even though the two were currently in critical condition, with one of them suffering from trigger withdrawal. Endeavor had unfortunately tried to keep the kidnapping of his wife under wraps, and the masses could only see the tragedy of an abused woman lashing out. The masses were crying out for Endeavor's death, let alone arrest or retirement. Even if the man could endure, it was uncertain if he still had a future as a public hero. Endeavor was too controlling with his methods. I learned that you should never expect things from people. Instead, put them into situations and let them do what you have come to expect of them. The fact that Endeavor had tried to keep the kidnapping of his own wife and tried to deal with everything in secret had worked out of League of Villains in the end. The masses did not suspect League of Villains at all for Mrs. Todoroki's current condition. Could you clarify that? Some people are pineapples and some are tomatoes. Knowledge is knowing tomato is a fruit and wisdom is knowing that it's the only fruit that belongs on a pizza. Pizza is like family, and Endeavor ruined his. Not a big fan of Hawaiian either. Family is very important to you, it seems. So, looking at your scars, would you say your family life was like young Todoroki's? Family isn't something as thin as blood. Ho ho ho. So even some like you has a personal hero, I take it? You got it all wrong. The mug in Tamura's hands dissipates into dust as he tightens his grip, letting his 5 fingers grasp upon it by complete accident, leaving his hands empty. He stares at those empty hands of his and reminisces. When I was in trouble as a child. The heroes will, before long the heroes will. Everyone said things like that, but truthfully, they were trying to ignore me, brushing me aside, so they could continue smiling like nothing happened. It's not like it's their responsibility. A hero will do something, but by the same measure, when Tamura was in trouble, when everyone brushed him aside, it wasn't a hero that saved him. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not my fault. I take it you don't like your quirk very much? It did make my life difficult. I had plenty of bad days because of it, but I'm not the only one. I think I came out better than most despite it. The masses were positively insane. Speaking of bad days and your scars, do you sympathize with Mrs. Todoroki despite what she had done? It wasn't his fault he didn't fit in. It wasn't his fault that he was wrong. He wasn't the only one. People like him do not only appear once, but twice. Maniacs like us have no place they can call home. The people heroes save are always the virtuous people and no one else. I wasn't saved by a hero that day, but I found someone that accepted me, sensei. If I'm able to useful to those that accepted me for whom I was, then I think I can be happy being who I am. What I was searching for, what we're all searching for are others just as crazy as us. We're all just seeking a place we can belong. Twice, no not just twice, thrice, people like them appeared in every age, even before quirks. Call them madmen, maniacs or minuses, people like them exist, yet this society which champions peace actively seek to destroy people like him, heroes being the means. Who made the world that way? All Might, was his answer, but he wouldn't dare say it out loud. So you are one of those who think that if quirks did not appear, society would have been better off. This sensei, who is he? You could say sensei adopted me. He would be something like a father. I was a spoiled brat, but that changes when your family expands. Birth order maybe? Once you get a little sister you naturally become more responsible. You learn to work around the selfishness of others while striving for your goals, like Gashapon. Gashapon? Life is like Gashapon. You can't gain anything unless you give up something in return. You probably won't win, but you won't be left with nothing either. Natural-born losers, the weakest of the weakest like us need to assume everything will go wrong and lay out our plans around them. Having a high-profile son of a pronounced hero joining the ranks of League of Villains would have been ideal. A son turning away from his corrupt hero father, personally denouncing the true nature of heroes would have made for a good poster boy for League of Villains, even if that son only did it because we held his mother ransom. They even went through the trouble of all fisitoning away Ingenium's injuries so he could walk again, just so his little brother wouldn't have tailed the two-faced kid this week. He wondered how he should have repaid Monoma for that little tidbit, considering he was having an existential crisis. Anyways, that plan was a failure, since their hostage escaped and went mad. But that didn't matter, things were still going in their favor precisely because their hostage went on a rampage. Those people called winners, I find them all delusional. They act like everything is fine, that there isn't something simply wrong or strange in this world of ours, as if tragedies don't happen. They break down when things don't go their way and hopefully they come to see the world as it is like us. Right now, the pillar that was the number 2 hero was broken both in body and public perception, so it didn't matter that two-faced brat walked out on them. It didn't matter that Kurojiri let him escape with his warp gate. The stupid masses were listening intently to someone like him on live television, from Yakuza bosses like Overhaul to little kids like Kuta. Right before he accepted to do this talk show, Overhaul had approached him for funding. It seemed that the Yakuza, relics of the past, have a hard time finding investors of all things. Well, their entire trigger supply was pumped into that white-haired woman recently, so it was convenient Overhaul was offering them a deal. League of Villains was a household name at this point, and they weren't short on cash from all those paid publicity stunts they pulled that may or may not have subtly pushed their message. To think that even little kids look up to him and were thrilled into shaking hands with him, he couldn't contain his infectious smile. League of Villains had done a terrible thing and they were getting rewarded for it. But isn't that how the world works? Isn't that how the world has always worked? This world of theirs was a funny thing. He had to hold back the laughter. Do you really consider yourself a natural-born loser if you can smile like that? The ones who can keep on smiling are the weakest in this world after all. The ones who can keep on smiling are the strongest in this world after all, were the words etched into All Might's heart by his predecessor. So he couldn't help but spit out the udon he was eating while passively listening to the diner's central television. He was originally supposed to meet up with his recommended planned successor and oversee his training, but Mirio was sidetracked by young Bakugo of all people. Now the four of them, All Might, Mirio, Bakugo and Saitama were having udon at a local diner. Bakugo had his eye on the emancipated-looking man, but quickly dismissed him. He still owed Saitama a meal when he had forgotten his wallet at the supermarket that one time. Young Midoriya was going to join them once the police questioning was over. It appeared that something really dire had happened again during the internship with Endeavor, and Bakugo seemed to be peeved that he had missed it. A landscape covered in ice. A plethora of citizens forced to wait for their inevitable demises, yet that fate was overturned when that boy appeared. As Endeavor rushed towards the problem's source, that boy was entirely focused on freeing everyone that came his way with unfathomable speed. Ice would be shattered and turned into snow to be carried away by the wind of his blows. The boy had an odd ability outside his incredible strength. If you were blessed enough to gaze upon him, your safety was all but guaranteed, yet that boy still agonized. Such feats may have been acceptable for any other hero that came to terms with their limits, but not that boy who didn't believe in limits. For everyone he freed, he had something that could be considered a bad habit. Despite his blistering speed, he would always slow down to check upon the condition of all those he saved. "Thank you, my hero." Gratitude was genuine, with tears rolling down the eyes of those who carried in his arms. But everything changed as he walked down the halls of the hospital in which Endeavor had been admitted to. "Why weren't you quicker? I lost my fingers to frostbite because of you." A single disgruntled voice from the masses he had saved merely questioned why he didn't do more with the power he had possessed. It would have been reasonable for him to ignore those words, but he refused to give in, holding steadfast to those feelings of wanting to save people. You may find your emotions grow distant. You may forget why you wanted to be a hero in the first place. Though his heart felt like it would break, the boy continued on with a smile which was not lost on the King of Night, who was ever watchful. Jairu, aka Headphone Jack, was on patrol with Todoroki for her internship, and she was surprised at what she had come across on the street. League of Villains' blood drive for the victims of Wookiees was an eye-catching banner. The League of Villains was quick to act in the face of the tragedy that only those glued to their phones would notice. In the middle of the closed-off street was something of a spectacle. Endeavor versus Vlad King. Dodging a whip composed of blood, Endeavor closed the distance and aimed his fist at his opponent's face while letting off a stream of fire. The crowd reacted with a barrage of booing. Hell Flame? The stream was dodged by a hair's breadth, but it did not pack the same sort of punch expected of Endeavor, until something in the distance could be seen burning. Witnessing the fight, Todoroki had one thing to say: "That's not Endeavor." Jairu was taken aback, but by eavesdropping on those lining up to donate, she understood the short version of what had transpired a few hours ago. Looking closely, the fake Endeavor sported two miniaturized flame throwers on his wrists. When the flames weren't large enough, a stagehand with patchwork skin would add to it with an actual fire-based quirk. Hiding his face with the cap, the man with patchwork skin was clearly conflicted with something. How can any of this be Stain's will, Shigaraki? You see those orphans? The victims of our little tragedy? They'll make fine heroes and villains in the next. Start tragedies, create victims, save them, inspire them, and feed them back into the system. It's a perfectly logical system where tragedy never ends and neither does conviction. Heroes are a valuable commodity in troubled times, but in peace, they're just fakes who smile for the camera. That's why All Might and this piece have to go. We will take back what it means to be a hero. The other stagehand of League of Villains that resembled an iguana was always present, trying to reassure him of something. A nostalgic camaraderie which Jairu could sympathize with. The League of Villains was the organization that was hired for that live drill exercise Jairu partook in near the start of the year at UA, she recalls. Still, it was unthinkable that a circus troupe would have so many capable members and so many willing to risk getting injured. Truly, they were fanatics of a sort, but the same could be said of her classmates at UA. League of Villains and UA seemed to have a good relationship considering the homeroom teacher of Class B was participating in this event, even if that was the farthest thing from the truth. In truth, Vlad King was using the opportunity of the blood drive to conduct a quick investigation for the rest of the UA faculty, as the opportunity presented itself. The teachers of UA had known that the threats at the lives of Class A that day was real, but not the students. When one of his students, Monoma, had called him out of the blue, he felt like he had to act when he picked up to the interrupted call tone. When he questioned the other students of the class by phone, the League of Villains came up. The attack on the unforeseen simulation joint USJ by Love was passed off as a training exercise to maintain the public trust in the hero system, but it had the unforeseen consequence of painting Love as something other than what they were to the public and even to UA students who believed it to be a sort of theater troupe. The time lag between this blood drive and the tragedy at Wookiees was simply too short. It wasn't a matter of being diligent. Love was obviously pulling some strings behind the scenes, but considering how one of his students was ensnared as a volunteer, he wasn't sure if those running this event today were unknowing victims as well. Public use of quirks is illegal unless one possesses a hero license or is supervised by a licensed hero. That was why theater troupes like League of Villains had to partner themselves with hero agencies when conducting publicity stunts. The supervising hero of today's blood drive was Ingenium of all people, though it shouldn't be surprising based on Ingenium's ideals. As someone who prided himself on saving people as quickly as possible during disasters and being hospitalized himself just recently, his motivations were easy to read. Yet something was off. He could have sworn he was permanently crippled by Stain based on what he heard from the news and his little brother's behavior at school. Ingenium decked out in his white armor minus the helmet, Tensei's face could be seen, so the Ingenium supervising this event was probably genuine. Maybe the media had simply overblown the extent of his injuries. As he looked at the stage hands, the one with patchwork skin and the other like a reptile, it was clear that they did not approve of Ingenium. But his thoughts were cut short as a stream of flames nearly misses his face. Ducking underneath Endeavor, condensing blood into a single point, a crimson bullet is fired with considerable force into the stomach. "Gone to gun," was what someone running the tent had screamed. In a splash of liquid, the disguise is undone, revealing the naked figure of a blonde girl with hair buns that must have been around the same age as his students. The males who were lining up to give blood were already leaking it through their noses at this point. But the feast for their eyes was soon replaced by a doppelganger of the Vlad King when the girl licked what she had been shot with. "She turned into me? It's awkward if you keep staring. I am deeply sorry," was what Vlad King apologized with today to the girl as he quickly turned his face to the side. Such an apology would eventually be repeated to his coworkers sometime in the future for not being able to see the obvious intent behind today's event. He would curse his eyes for not focusing on the face. As he looked into the tent, he spotted a girl with an uncanny resemblance to a certain runner-up in the recent UA Sports Festival and an old doctor who was speaking on the phone. A man in what could be called a gimp suit was meticulously taking pictures of each of the blood donors as well as taking body measurements to determine what size of commemorative t-shirt they would be taking home. "What is it, doctor? Do I really have to be doing this?" Young Tamura's scheme needed a licensed medical professional. The doctor understood what Shigaraki was trying to do with skill grinding. Even if the doctor understood, there was still one thing that bothered him. "Do I really have to sit next to the little demon? I didn't know you were a man of faith." As the threats to evil were ever growing stronger, All for One needed to cultivate his successor further and faster. All Might already had cheated, getting a good successor pre-cultivated by his allies. Still, the orphan originally named Tenko that he took in was born twisted from the start, so there was no doubt he would rise to the occasion. By introducing him to Stain, whose ideals grated on Tamura the wrong way, his successor would grow ever more independent, just as with the case of introducing him to the demon, even if that resulted in his ridiculous way of speech. For Tamura to take the helm as the head of the family known as the League of Villains, he needed to realize his convictions. Being able to scavenge plans gone awry and take advantage of such opportunities were crucial for Tamura to become the next him. His direct attack on the number 1 hero failed, and for that reason he decided to attack the number 2 hero indirectly. Kidnapping Endeavor's wife and making use of an aspiring hero as an unwitting accomplice showed that he was maturing. Even though the hostage escaped, Being under demonic influence, his successor quickly saw an opportunity to recoup his losses. Endeavor's image as a hero had already been destroyed, so it wouldn't be hard to guess the public reaction. Individuals may be smart, but groups can be stupid, being swayed with the flow of the times. All for One still remembers the day of his defeat, on how the whole world that he had rebuilt from the ashes seemed to turn against him as they were swayed by a symbol. Collecting blood samples would exponentially increase the usefulness of that toga girl whose quirk allowed her to disguise herself as anyone whose blood she digests. Allowing Twice to take measurements during the blood drive event would invariably increase the number of useful doubles to be used as decoys. Such doubles could be even more useful if the will of the original could be stripped away, but the demon could not be counted to do such things effectively, as evidenced with Endeavor's wife. Even with power to turn anything to nothing, Zako was inferior to Deku, who possessed infinite power in All for One's eyes. A useless thing that could not visualize victory. A playful defeatist that did everything at her own pace without regard to the concept of victory and probably worked to sabotage the efforts of others so they could not obtain it. He fears for Tamura's future as long as he keeps that thing around. As evidenced with the wife of Endeavor, turning someone's memories into nothing was not enough to get them to follow orders, even if combined with image training. AFO wonders if Tamura's next plan of action would involve that hypocrite from the sports festival. Ever since he was crippled by All Might, All for One had accepted his own humanity. The more he watched the bald figure, the more he accepted his place in the world. No matter how long he lives, becoming equal to that bald figure that stands on the very top was a delusion, for what was a man before a literal god? He had spent his entire life carving out order, to quell the disorder caused by the appearance of quirks, yet this world refused to be orderly with mysterious beings and the caped baldy running around. He acknowledged that the world was full of contradictions. He had accepted long ago that there were things he could not change with his own power, which is why he had to entrust his goals to a successor and his gang of problem children. To have faith that those problem children would destroy the order All Might had desperately tried to create on top of the corpses of his comrades. For all the despair All Might caused him, he wanted him to feel the same despair he had. AFO could not allow someone else to enjoy something he himself could never obtain, especially for someone who followed that foolish woman who was only ever about her ideals and drowned to death in them. As All for One stares at a computer monitor depicting the scalp of the sun, he ponders. What thoughts are running through your mind? Using his hair as a placebo? He's just flaunting it, isn't he? That was Saitama's only thought as he eavesdropped into the secret conversation All Might was having with the successor principal Nedzu, and his former sidekick had recommended for him. That's why we're eating udon. Just pretend it's a thin noodle. I get why Sir is such a big fan with that sense of humor of yours. Saitama rubs his scalp, agonizing over the relationship between hair and power. Even though it's natural for an old man to be bald, he still envied a full head of hair. For all those years he has lived, he had forgotten the sensation. It was like he never had hair on his head at all. The sensation of running his fingers through his hair, the things he would do to experience it. His beard, which served to hide the wrinkles he may or may not have actually possessed, did not count. Would he still look like an old man if he shaved it? But alas, his facial hair proved to be as resilient as any other part of his body. Saitama murmurs to no one in particular, "Could my beard be weaved into body armor? My costume is made from my hair," was what Mirio responded with without reading Saitama's mood. "You're flaunting it too." It all, surrounded by all these beautiful golden locks. Lost in thought after making such a remark, Lemillion had completely forgot about the strand of hair All Might had tried goading him into eating hidden away under the noodles of udon. How his permeation quirk handles food being partially digested by his body is not something people are keen on thinking about, Saitama included. It was for that reason Saitama decided to leave once he saw the boy gagging. He should have left half an hour ago with the perpetually constipated brat. "I'm out." All Might quickly assumed that something he did was at fault. "The disciple of my sidekick is also my disciple." Did he take offense to that? Even though All Might's health was declining, he saw Saitama-sensei as a kindred spirit. Behind the beard, perpetually making the same face the young Kaminari gets whenever he electrocutes himself, Saitama-sensei must have been suffering from some sort of health problem just as he was. Leaving the diner, Saitama decided to seek out his no-show disciple. So where was that hospital? His father was more imposing in his memories, Shoto could recall. That is why he couldn't fathom the weak figure splayed across the hospital bed. The man obsessed with his rank and surpassing all might never cared for his mother's well-being, but now he rests on the hospital bed because he refused to harm her. Some like you. I don't understand at all. What are you? For Endeavor, his son's question was stupid. Isn't it obvious? I'm a hero. Regardless of how Endeavor may act, he was still a man who willingly chose to become a hero. Regardless of an individual hero's intentions and goals, a hero's job built on the concept of self-sacrifice, so what he had done was a matter of course. He was a hero regardless of how the public may have perceived him, or how they will perceive him now on. Clattering steps without semblance of order could be heard outside in the hallway. Knock. Knock. It seems a rambunctious bunch have gathered outside, spurred on by the recent news. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.